exploring the world was basically you had to go there and see it and find it. So on the surface of the Earth, and I could be mistaken here, but literally the whole surface has been seen by somebody or been up there. So that level of exploration is pretty much over, except that the same kind of exploration goes on today where you can't see. And a big part of that is below the surface of the Earth, right under your feet. And I don't mean the subway system. And it takes true explorers to do this because there is no remote sensing technology that can tell us what's there or what's not there. So it takes people with a certain mindset, a certain courage to be able to go into a dark area. And most people will say, let's get the hell out of here. Cavers are a little bit strange that way. They go into a dark place and they say, cool. And they say, I wonder what's around that next corner. What's over there? And that's what draws them in, is that true spirit of exploration. And these things are, I don't know the total number of how many miles of passage is below the surface. Nobody does. But I can tell you to date that many thousands of miles all over the world have been found. And the discoveries in them are unique. They're different, both geologically and biologically. Life forms that have never been seen before. Life forms that may or may not exist on other planets. So we'll be talking a lot about caves today, but that's not the only dark places. Another places where people have not seen is the depths of the ocean, the blackness at the bottom where light never shines. And today you'll see some of that too. And of course the biggest black void is up, space. And we'll be talking about that today. We have some phenomenal speakers that are going to shed some light on these very dark places and bring into this room. Now things are being recorded. I don't know if we're live streaming, so be careful what you say, because it may be rebroadcast. But anyway, two organizations that are sponsoring, co-sponsors, is the National Speleological Society. It took me a long time to be able to pronounce that word. And the National Speleological Foundation. Now they're two separate organizations, but they're closely related. The largest and most significant is the National Speleological Society. It's the largest organization in the world that's dedicated to the exploration, survey, and mapping, or conservation and science of caves. But the word speleological is Greek derivation. It's really pretty simple. Speleo is a Greek word for cave and logical study of. The foundation is sort of a separate but independent arm. Three organizations, but the foundation basically handles the investment, financing, and protects funds of the NSS and also other cave conservation organizations. But I need to make it clear to you that people who go caving are not spelunkers, okay? Trust me, this is how you know the difference, okay? Because cavers call themselves cavers. They don't call themselves spelunkers. So if you hear someone talking about spelunking, they don't know what they're talking about. So, but the difference is, the simple definition is that cavers rescue spelunkers. Okay, this morning we're going to start off with an audio-visual presentation. Dave Saki, where are you, Dave? You here? Dave, I don't know, you stand up for us, I know it's in the dark. Dave is chair of the, I'm going to refer to the National Speleological Society as the NSS. He's the chair of what we call the photo salon. Every year there's competition for the best photography in caves around the world, and he puts together some of the presentations, some of the awards, and has put together a wonderful collection this morning of dark places below the surface to kind of get you in the mood and give you a sense of where we're going today. Dave, you want to make any comments? Or?
So I just wanted to say that I guess the slide program today is actually, it calls it Expeditions to the Edge. So it's more or less a slide presentation of different cave systems that have been being explored in the recent past here. Fort Stanton, the caves in the Grand Canyon, and some foreign countries also, including China and Slovenia. So,
good. Thank you, Dave. Anyway, Louis, are we ready to roll them? I guess. Go ahead and roll it. Dave, thank you very much. I wanted to, if we can have the lights back up again. I mentioned at the beginning that two of our sponsors, the National Speleological Society and Foundation. Well, I wanted to recognize that here today we have the president of the National Speleological Foundation, Doug Soroka. You cavers are joking, I know, whatever. Doug, stand up. And also Pete Johnson. Pete Johnson is chair of the director of the National Speleological Society, and we sincerely thank them for the support for this end. And I failed to properly introduce my co-conspirator, my co-organizer, is Pete Nicola. Pete Nicola. Chris Nicola, Pete Johnson, Doug Soroka. I need to check my credentials to know who I am. Obviously, I've not had enough coffee this morning. But anyway, thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. Now, I know this is Broadway, and there's lots of actors and professional people over here, and I don't know what we do to nominate you for an off-Broadway type of award for your, for your act. Anyway, thank you. Our first speaker today is Dr. Louise Hose, and Louise has been a long member of the Explorers Club, but also a life member of the NSS, a director of the NSS, and she is a professional geologist. She has dedicated her entire life to the exploration and study of caves, not only in the United States, but around the world. Louise has also led and carried the Explorers flag to Mexico and Oman, as well as participating in many flagged expeditions. For those of you who may not be familiar with the flagged expedition, if you see on the walls, like behind me here, is the Explorers Club flag. And on it, there is a recorded number. And you can apply if you are an Explorer Club member and you're going to go on an expedition. And you can apply for the privilege of being able to bring the flag with you. So flags are precious, and they are highly honored. And there's a record with every one of them. Everyone has a number, and most of them have retired for a number of years, but there's a number of active ones. And so we will have more about that a little bit later, about Explorers Club flags. But when we talk about a flagged expedition, is that they had the honor of carrying these flags to some of the most remote parts of the world, and also to space, as you'll find out later, which also went to the moon with Neil Armstrong. Anyway, Louise has spent her early career as a university professor and finished her career as a senior scientist with the National Park Service. With the National Park Service, she developed and ran the National Cave and Karst Research Institute, which is located down in Carlsbad, New Mexico. As a field geologist, she's explored and documented virgin cave passages in Greece, Mexico, Oman, Papua New Guinea, as well as many caves in the United States. I should probably explain the word virgin cave. It's not what you think. Well, maybe it is. A cave, or a part of a cave, where no man, nobody from the beginning of time has ever set foot in there, is referred to as virgin cave or virgin passage. And any caver who has had that experience to set foot, and your light is the first light in the history of the universe to explore and find these things, it's like an adrenaline rush. It's absolutely incredible. And Louise has had the opportunity to be able to enter and explore many virgin passages and caves in the United States. Anyway, she has written 15 articles for peer-reviewed scientific publications, as well as hundreds of articles, reports, books, presentations, and other scientific performances, as well as being published in National Geographic twice. And without further ado, Louise Hose.
We need my slides. Okay, I'm probably going to be a little bit different than some of the other presentations. Instead of focusing on just one of the areas I went to, I'm just going to be telling you some stories about my 55 years of caving. I started out caving as a college student 55 years ago. At that time, my helmet cost $1 from a surplus sale. The lamp bracket, elastic chin strap, and new Just Right carbide lamp Came from a mining supply company, and probably all of them together cost about $20. The clothing was Levi blue jeans, which were all the rage at the time, and then we had cotton or wool thermal underwear if we needed it. Usually it was a denim shirt or a denim jacket or just a sweatshirt on top. And then, of course, we all used Vietnam jungle boots from the Army surplus store. Cave packs were always old gas masks that we bought for a couple bucks from the surplus store. Then I bought a tube tent, some parachute cord, and an Insulite closed cell foam pad for camping, and used the old Dacron sleeping bag that I probably had since I was a toddler. Because I immediately got into vertical caving, I bought 10 feet of tubular webbing for 10 cents a foot, 2 locking carabiners, 2 non-locking carabiners, 2 brake bars, and a single link to complete my rappel setup. The new pair of Jumars cost $17 at that time. So even a poor student, college student like me, could afford to be outfitted with an adequate kit. Very different today, but that's partly because people think they need a lot fancier stuff than we had. So equipment got better, or it certainly changed. And it got better in some cases, not in this case. This is the plastic Just Right that came out a couple years after I started caving. The Just Right company, which is the only American company making lamps, started to market a plastic version and abandoned brass. Apparently, Just Right didn't realize that their major customer base were cave and mine explorers, and since the lamps melted, if not held rigidly vertical, it was a dismal failure. And I thankfully never spent any money on it. Can we hit the audio very briefly? Okay, if we can't do that, I'll just... Okay, those of you that know it, ready? Plastic just right, plastic just right, melted on the front of my hard hat. Do, 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 do. Ever get out, I'll stop and bust you. Underneath my Jeep, I'll squash you flat. Yeah, or the old cavers are. Thank you, Emily. Although my caving was initially recreational, I quickly fell in love with geology. So I went to the geology department after taking a couple courses and announced I wanted to be a geology major. The very kind department chair looked at me and said, "Louise, we'd love to have you as a major, but you need to understand you will never get a job. The mining companies, the oil companies will not hire women." And so you also have to remember, this organization would not allow women in either. So I dabbled in citizen science for a while, a term that wasn't used in those days. And I feel fortunate because the people I was around really believed in having a broad set of skills as cavers. And I determined that I wanted to be one of those people who had a broad set of skills, could do at least adequately anything that a good explorer would have. One of the first skills you have to have is a way to get to the caves. And so, sometimes, like in this case, you can drive right up to the cave and throw a rope down. But in the western part of the United States, and in parts that I was going caving, that wasn't very common. So I had to get a 4-wheel drive when I had the money. I had to learn how to drive them and to carry the tools and equipment needed to clear boulders and vegetation. The vehicles didn't always make it to the destination, but I was not driving. This is where a government driver from Oman was driving and lost control, and thankfully nobody got hurt. So getting there very often involved backpacking with 60 to 95-pound packs. Our gear wasn't as light as it is today, and to make it worse, in karst areas being where caves are, there often is not any water on the surface, so you have to carry all your water with you for however long you're going to be. Then in tropical areas like Papua New Guinea and Mexico, we needed to carry machetes. One time going down to Mexico to work on my master's thesis, I was stopped by the federales, and they swarmed through my truck looking for weapons. I talked to the officer while the young men were going through the truck, and they found my machete. And they were very excited. It was clear they thought an arrest was about to happen. Fortunately, the officer looked at them and said, no, this woman is traveling alone. She must have protection of a machete. So we tucked the machete back away, and off I went. Rock climbing is a skill needed both inside the cave and used to access potential caves. Most of us practice rock climbing for those reasons, but most of us are driven by exploration and getting somewhere, not by form points and sexy lycra clothing. But more often we descend and climb ropes, not rocks, even outside. On the right is a cave we entered only a couple years ago. It's about 50 meters up a very steep cliff, then required traversing across the slope to reach the entrance. Just inside, the cave is about 30 more meters of climbing up before you can get into the main part of the cave. To reach the lead, a strong lead climber in his 60s climbed a cliff, made the traverse, then climbed the interior climb, setting bolts and other protection along the way. His two 60-something companions then climbed the fixed rope into the cave, which they dubbed "No Cave for Old Men." I have visited it and studied it several times in the last 2 years while in my 70s, and I am petitioning to change the name to "No Cave for Old People." Requiring perhaps less skill, but maybe as much daring, is rappelling down a cliff to a cave entrance. If the cave entrance is overhanging, you have to do some Batman-like magic and swing a grappling hook into the cave, trying to catch floor debris, and then pull yourself on into the cave. Those following can either be pulled in or, as I'm doing here, use your climbing gear to climb your way back into the cave. But actually, that isn't the scariest part. To me, the scariest part is being the last person to go back out and climb up. Because if you're not the last person, a person in the cave can lower the rope out gently, and then you climb back up. But if you were the last person, you got to figure out how to get out there. And every time that rope swings back and forth, you're thinking about, at least I'm thinking about, what is it doing on the rocks above, and how is it getting frayed? So if you have enough rope, you put it through a descending ring, and you lower yourself out until you're vertical, and then you have to pull the rope out so it doesn't get caught. And there's always a big jolt, and I find that really nerve-wracking. Other ways to get to the cave that I've used is rowing across the Lake Mead Reservoir, or using contract helicopters. I keep fishing the wrong one. You can't get to the cave this way, but you can get to the cave area this way. And so sometimes I fly one of our planes out to the cave area, and then that's nice because you can reconnaissance from the air by using in the plane. But the coolest transportation, without question, was when we flew in the Sultan of Oman's helicopters. If you have ever had the chance to go caving by helicopter, I totally recommend it. The views are spectacular, and the helicopter makes great scale. So how does the Explorers Club play into these caving adventures? Well, I was part of several flagged expeditions in the late 70s and early 80s where my male colleagues were eligible for field exploration grants and other advantages of Explorers Club membership, but the club still wasn't allowing women members. And while it was clear that good old boy clubs were fading and that lots of women were more than qualified for membership, one prominent member, in fact, Russ Gurney, told me, "We keep bringing it up for a vote, and eventually enough of the old hardliners will die, and women will be accepted." Sure enough, in 1981, by a vote of 753 to 613, the bylaws were amended and women were allowed in the Explorers Club. Today, women comprise approximately 23% of the Explorers Club. Soon after becoming a fellow in the Explorers Club, I applied for a club exploration grant and flagged to map the geology inside and over the entire potential surface above Sistema Cueva. The cave system down in southern Mexico had been the focus of several flagged expeditions, and our surveys had documented that the upper part of the system was, at that time, the deepest explored cave in the Western Hemisphere. Dye had been dumped into the upper cave, and 8 days later it came out from a spring 2,000 meters or more than 2,000 meters or 6,500 feet below. But we didn't have the true elevation differential in order to claim that it was the deepest karst hydrology system. So I applied and received the Explorers Club flag, a grant from the Explorers Club. In addition, I applied for and received the National Geographic Exploration and Research Grant. No doubt that was assisted by the Explorers Club endorsement. Mapping the surface and subsurface geology was mostly done as a solo effort on the side of the larger exploration expeditions that were going on, but establishing the depth record required a team. Instead of trying to survey over land from the highest entrance, which is Cueva Escondido, to the lowest entrance, which is this spring called Cheve Resurgence, instead of doing that, we used very early GPS technology. Again, the endorsement of the Explorers Club and the National Geographic Society helped us find other sponsors like Magellan Navigation Systems and the University of Colorado's fledgling GPS program. Using differential GPS, because at that time the signals were intentionally scrambled, and a short overland survey, we were able to establish the exact position and elevation of the uppermost and lowermost entrances. Then combining those data points with an earlier cave diving survey by another Explorers Club flagged expedition, we firmly established the total depth of the cave system at 2,585 meters. That's about 8,000 feet. And that is the deepest karst hydrology system in the world. Work continues at Cheve by younger cavers, and the actual explored depth of the upper cave is now 1,529 meters, the second deepest in the Western Hemisphere, and the 11th deepest explored in the world. I am sure that Cheve will eventually be the deepest explored cave in the world. To my geologist's mind, the way I think about it, it's already the deepest cave. Oops. So one of the great things about joining the Explorers Club is I got the Explorers Club directory, and I was able to find the address of someone who had really made a huge impact on my life. Explorers Club, kind of legendary Explorers Club member, fellow, John Goddard. He had been best friends with my high school English teacher. And as a result, he came twice to my high school and talked about his adventures of being the first known person to kayak the entire Nile, and another one where he was the first person known to kayak the Congo. These were not the sort of adventures that were on TV in those days. We didn't have the Discovery Channel, and I was completely enthralled. However, in the 1960s, I was convinced that only boys had these opportunities. But John had planted an ember that exploded into a full passion when I found caving and had the opportunity to do John Goddard-like things. John and I became friends until his death in 2013. So, my Explorers Club sponsor and good friend Jim Pisarowicz, who's speaking right after me, had been bugging me for years to come down to Tabasco, Mexico, and look at a cave he had been exploring, Cueva de Villaluz. I finally joined him down there and recognized that this was one of the world's most amazing caves. I immediately started soliciting some top-notch cave scientists to assess the cave for its science potential. We carried the Explorers Club flag on this December 1998 science expedition. The cave is just flippin' amazing. Based on our reconnaissance findings and documentation, I applied for and received funding from National Geographic Society, the Explorers Club, and the National Speleological Society. One of the reasons we needed their sponsorship was for safety equipment that you don't generally need to go caving. Cueva de Villaluz is a very active sulfuric acid cave with a toxic atmosphere of elevated hydrogen sulfide and sometimes elevated carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and dangerously low oxygen levels. We also carried many scuba tanks to help escape when the atmosphere did get too dangerous. Of course, I was most fascinated by the geology, particularly the sulfurfolia. And it's the only cave in the world that is known to have this kind of deposit. One time, a careless visitor, one of our media people, put his hand on this site and broke off all of the sulfurfolia. A year later, it came back and was covered up again. It's just an extremely active cave, very different than most. Our studies in this cave have been a significant contributor to the understanding of how caves form from, at least some caves form, from sulfuric acid. But what captured most people's attention was the base of the complex food web, chemoautotrophic bacteria. These are organisms that make a living not from photosynthesis, not from eating other organisms, but by using the energy that is released when hydrogen sulfide combines with oxygen, and energy is released by that chemical reaction. Most compelling of these organisms were these slender stalactites that, sorry. Are these slender stalactites which actually wobble. If you blow on them, they wobble around, and they drip sulfuric acid with a pH of, typically 1, sometimes 0. And as a scientist, I should have known this, but sometimes negative. I didn't even know there was a negative pH, but if you know what pH is, it makes sense. Extremely acidic environment. Now my good friend Jim Pisarowicz, you'll find out he's pretty strange. He named these things snottites. Perfect, because they wobble and seem to be like snot, but they hang like stalactites. Well, there were those that were critical of our application of the term snottites to a scientific feature, but the name is stuck. It's been repeatedly used in the peer-reviewed, refereed literature, and it drew the attention of thousands of kids worldwide into science. I think pretty much every child's science magazine around the world covered it. We also were picked up by the mainstream media. The first ones to pick us up were the U.S. News and World Report. That was followed by the TV show Nova, Discovery Channel, NHK from Japan, CNN, National Geographic TV. Radio wanted in on the action, so we were on NPR's Morning Edition and Pulse of the Planet. 2 book authors, Michael Ray Taylor, who's here speaking later, and Peter Lane Taylor, came down to learn more about what we were doing. Many science magazines covered the work. And if you Google snot-tight, you will find it referenced in lots of non-scientific or even caving forums. They're even built into a digital game called Dragon. But despite all the weird biology in this cave, we never spotted Bat Child. The pinnacle of our Via Luz coverage was by National Geographic magazine with the fantastic photography of Stephen Alvarez. Once again, our sponsors were very pleased with the attention our work brought to the science of caves. But even weirder to me, I became an icon for women's field scientists for a few years. Now, I'm an introvert who's actually well known for avoiding publicizing my caving activities in caves. So it all seemed pretty strange. But the focus was on the science, so I rolled with it. I had the honor of speaking in this room, in this building, as part of the Explorers Club lecture series. I was even named number 16 of the greatest adventurers at the turn of the millennium by Outside Magazine. Very unexpected and unsought stuff for someone who doesn't have a publicist and certainly doesn't want one. But I had a secret, and I was outed. I had a phobia of bats. Because I would fairly quickly become panicky if I was around bats flying, and because Via Luz had a lot of bats, whenever I took a journalist into the cave, I had to warn him that there might come a time, if bats were flying, that I would say, I have to leave now. And that did not mean at the end of the shooting, did not mean when we got the equipment picked up. It meant I had to get out of there now. Well, of course, the journalists loved this. It was just great, you know. Intrepid cave explorers afraid of bats. So, as a result, I got outed in magazine articles and television videos. And I got a call from a producer for the Learning Channel. She asked if I'd be willing to be filmed being cured of my bat phobia. I couldn't refuse that offer. It started with looking on camera, looking at photographs and videos of bats and having me give my reaction. There was none. It was a photograph or a video. Then what they seemed to expect to be the perfect horror for me, she showed me a picture of a huge bunch of bats flying out of a cave entrance. And she rather menacingly said, "What do you think this is?" And I said, "It's the evening bat flight exiting Brucker Cave in Texas." And she looked at me and goes, "How do you know that?" And I said, "I have a phobia of bats, but I'm not stupid about bats." Despite the disappointment of not being able to film me in terror, they proceeded with the therapy, and despite my great skepticism, I was cured in about 5 minutes, and I've never gotten the phobia back. I later learned that from several psychologists that phobias are generally very easy to cure, which caused me to wonder, why do any of us live with phobias? That should have been my bat one. Okay. As a result of an article I wrote on Via Luce in the Explorers Journal, geoscientist and Explorers Club fellow Dr. Farouk El-Baz contacted me with an invitation from the Sultan of Oman to visit their cave and assess some of their caves, particularly Majlis al-Jinn, which was thought at the time to be the largest single cave chamber in the world. And oops, notice that's at 747. The magic of Don Davison. Dr. El-Baz was working with the Omani government on a hydrologic resource program, but he was best known in the United States as one of the geologic advisors for the Apollo project. In fact, he was so well known that Star Trek Next Generation named one of their shuttlecraft after Dr. El-Baz. The Omanis were actually hoping that my contacts with National Geographic would help to arrange a feature article in the magazine. Their plan worked. Again, we carried the Explorers Club flag, the National Geographic flag, and also represented the National Speleological Society. It's a great triad for exploration. While I had worked with National Geographic photographer Stephen Alvarez at Via Luce, I'd never traveled with him, and that led to some new experiences. First, he traveled with what must have been nearly a literal ton of equipment. The digital photography age was just beginning, and National Geographic was getting into putting video clips on the website. Stephen had traditional film equipment plus digital still and video equipment. Thank goodness we had an Omani official there to help us get through customs and immigration. But perhaps the most unnerving moment of the adventure wasn't rappelling 200-meter cliffs or flying low through desert canyons, wondering if the gigantic helicopter blades were going to hit the rock walls. But when the leader of a wandering Bedouin tribe came up that was collecting frankincense, that's frankincense, it's collecting frankincense, tried to trade his Toyota pickup truck for me. Stephen entered into what seemed to be serious negotiations. Although I was officially the expedition leader, once a National Geographic photographer shows up, he is in charge. My first international trip outside of Mexico was to a remote part of Greece to explore and map the deepest known pit in the world at that time, or what was thought to be, it hadn't been measured yet, Abyss Proventina. One day, men from the local village came to us and said a young boy had broken his arm and was in great pain, and could we please help? They had sent for medical help, but it would be at least 6 hours until the doctor would come. They wanted us to help. We went and gave the boy over-the-counter pain relief, probably just aspirin, but declined to do more. They came back a few hours later begging for more assistance, because he was still in great pain and it was unbearable. The project leader had been a medic in the Army and decided to put traction on the arm and try to pull it back into alignment. We did so, and it greatly relieved the pain. When the doctor finally arrived, he was clearly drunk, if he was a doctor, gave a thumbs up to us for our great work, and proceeded to go down some more ouzo. Since the pain had greatly dissipated, which is the reason they didn't want to move the boy, we advised the family to take him to the nearest hospital, which they did. The village brought gifts and invited us to their celebration the following week. It was a lesson in the rewards of a little kindness. On the way home from Greece, two of us stopped and debriefed our trip with the discoverer of Abyss Proventina, the infamous Jim Eyre. Jim, then in his 50s, was world famous. British cave explorer with immense talent for comic writing and cartooning, cave exploring and rescue, and drinking and storytelling. He would have been a hit at this event. Jim and his British colleagues were still using cable ladders to descend and ascend cave pits in the 1970s, while Americans had almost completely changed over to what we called single rope technique, where you descended the rope, rappelled down the rope, and then climbed the rope back up. While visiting Jim, he kept looking at me and saying, if she did Proventina, there must be something to this single rope technique stuff. It was long-held male explorers' opinion that if women climbed a peak or bottomed a cave, it must be an easy stroll. In this case, new techniques and a bit of luck had changed the Proventina abyss into something that he, as one of the world's leading cave explorers, was unable to get to the bottom of, into an easy stroll for a young woman. To be honest, there was a bit of truth to his opinion. New equipment and techniques were changing the caving world. So we now had a measurement on Proventina and was not quite as deep as a huge open-air pit that had been discovered in central Mexico a couple years before, El Sótano del Rancho del Barro. Jim wanted to reach the bottom of that pit, and he was sure he could do it if we would teach him single rope technique and take him. Will and I agreed to do that, and we found ourselves backpacking a 500-meter rope and other equipment the 23 kilometers into the pit. Once there, we discovered that the rope had a fray in it, and that it would be dangerous to use that part of the rope. Since the pit is a total free fall for nearly 500 meters, our only choice was to pass a knot about 50 meters down or about 450 meters up. This is a bit of a challenge for an experienced single rope technique person, but it was a huge ask for Jim. We trained him on a nearby bridge and trusted his enormous wealth of experience to carry him successfully through. Well, as Jim described it, the puppy dog knot from the bridge turned into a monster junkyard beast at the pit. The first problem was that the bridge knot probably had less than 1 kilogram of rope hanging below him as he was learning how to pass a knot. In the pit, the rope hanging below was 39 kilos or 85 pounds, which was a whole different ball game. The second problem was that Jim was using a homemade knockoff ascender, as our type of equipment was not available in the UK at the time. And those ascenders popped and broke under the stress. Then he managed to get his camera strap, his safety cord, his Jumar sling, and 2 main carabiners jammed up into the mess. As Jim later wrote, it was a bit of a balls up. After a valiant half-hour struggle, he called to Will below him. Will, I seem to have a bit of a problem. Will's response was, hang about. Jim wrote later, in over 30 years of caving, this must rank as one of the finest pieces of advice I'd ever been offered. Will was able to pass Jim on the rope, climb up, pass Jim on the rope, and help him switch over to climbing, which resulted in this cover in one of Jim's books, which Emily has for sale, I think. Has a couple of them. Once they got out, we tried to pull the rope up, and the rope was hooked on a log. So we gave up for the day, but there was just too much value to that rope. So the next day we returned, and the only one that was feeling strong enough to do it, I rappelled down, cleared the rope, climbed back up. Probably the only person ever to do El Sótano twice within 24 hours. Jim later wrote after the trip, I was no longer a male chauvinist pig. Louise was responsible for the transformation. This was a common theme in my early decades of caving. Many, probably most of the men in caving didn't believe in women's ability to do the tough efforts. But thankfully, most were open-minded enough to let us try, and then when we succeeded, they changed their minds. But the most traumatic events in my caving career had nothing to do with my sex. One situation that still makes me shudder was when two of us descended a virgin pit in southern Mexico. It was newly discovered at the bottom of a deep sloping doline or depression. The pit was just over 200 meters deep, and while a near vertical wall, it did not overhang at any point along the drop. And more than most previously descended pits, the wall rock was shattered and sharp. The expedition was organized by Quebec cavers, and like the French, they favored 8mm rope, which was extremely vulnerable to fraying. So anywhere where the rope might touch the wall, they would establish a new anchor point. We had to establish 13 new anchor points in this pit. Once we had explored the drop and determined we couldn't go any further without more rope, Mark and I started the ascent using a common practice, which is to climb. First person climbs up the segment, passes the anchor, and then they start up the second segment, and the second person starts up the first. So only one person is on a segment at a given time, but you were right above each other. When Mark got to the longest of the segments, I stopped and waited for him to finish climbing it and move across to the next segment. As he was doing that, he pulled on the rock, and a suitcase-size rock came off. Now, I am immediately below him, and this is screaming down the pit. I calculated it, and it would have been going about 74 miles per hour when it passed me, 33 meters a second when it passed me. All I could do was flatten myself against the wall as close as I could, and I figured I didn't have to worry about being hurt. I'd be killed. I could tell it was a huge one. The rock passed by less than a meter away. I felt the wind of it as it went, but it didn't hit me. However, it had hit the wall at least twice on the way down. Had it hit the rope? We didn't know. Should I continue climbing, or should I go back down and wait for Mark to return to camp and bring another rope to replace the segment, which would have taken about 10 hours? It was a tough decision. What would you have done? I hope you've enjoyed the stories. I have to thank the photographers, many of whom weren't credited because over the years you lose track, or I at least have lost track of that, but I appreciate them letting me use the images. Most were mine, but a lot of them weren't. And also to those who supported me through this crazy 55-year journey.
Do we have any questions from the audience for Louise? Louise?
I can't see a thing, so.
Emily, Louise, which mark was it? Tremblay?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Emily, real quick, have they discovered what causes folia at this point, or is it still speculative?
Well, that's an interesting question because literally right now I am working with Donald Davis to write up a paper on his ideas. Donald thinks there is kind of a universal theory that he's putting together, or hypothesis that he's putting together, that it always occurs at an interface where you basically get supersaturation, and whether it's in the water or in the air, and it drifts down and forms from the top, along the top. There are some people that don't think the sulfur is folia, but they've never seen it. But there are mud folia, there are lava folia, and to Donald, the main key is that it's an interface of two different conditions where it grows, and you'll have to wait for the paper to get a better explanation than that.
quick one. Were you still afraid of bats the time you and I crawled beneath vampire bats in via Louise? Because I thought you were braver than me.
I suspect I had the problem at that time because I don't remember. It was while I was working down in Via Luz, but you were down there quite early, so I assume that is Mike. Yeah. You were.
I think it was 98.
Yeah, I don't remember dates, but you were there very early. You were with Nova, so
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the only time I ever crawled beneath vampire bats and saw their unfortunate droppings.
Yeah. I could control it for a while, and I would be extremely nervous, but I could control it for a while, and then there'd be a point where I knew I was about to lose it. And that's why I'd tell him, I'll be okay, I'll control it for a while, but when I say I have to go at that right then.
Well, if you notice, it looks like she's kind of overcome with phobia. On the front of her laptop, she said she's got bats.
Yeah, they're good guys.
Any other questions? Louise, thank you very much. I've known Louise for a lot of years, but I didn't know about the phobia thing. But it does explain something, though. It explains that I wasn't sure why her husband, Paul, who's here, why he was driving that Toyota, but now I know. A couple of functional things. If you have not been to the Explorers Club, you may wonder where the bathrooms are at. It's a very good question. This is an old mansion, and they're kind of hidden. Now, normally, if you go out through the door here and cross over to the other side in that room, it's called the library, there's a bathroom there, but not today because it's under reconstruction, so that one is closed. You have to go, if you go downstairs, back to the lobby, turn right through the lounge, go past the bar, go up about 3 steps, which is what they call the Apollo room, astronaut room. There is one there, okay? There is also a ladies' room. If you go back down to the lobby downstairs and go to the back of the lobby by the registration desk, there's a little door there, and there's a ladies' restroom back in there. There is a third one that we normally wouldn't use, but I think it's okay for this, is that if you go out the door and go up the stairs, which usually only members are allowed, so I'm probably sticking my neck out over here, but if you go to up to the next floor and just turn right, there's like a little hallway there, and there's one there on the left, so that's just a functional thing. The other thing is that today's festivities do include lunch, which will be served here in the building. It's part of the day's activities. And at the end of the day, we'll have a reception that everybody is invited to, and it's all being held here on this floor level later in the day. Okay, on to our next speaker. This is going to be kind of cool. Our next speaker is Dr. Jim Pisarowicz, and I've also known Jim for a long time. But Jim he's a long-time member of not only the NSS and the Explorers Club. In fact, I think, Jim, you've been a member of the Explorers Club for what, 46 years? 46 years, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. He's a fellow of the National Speleological Society. He was honored by the NSS in 1990 and awarded the NSS's highest award for cave exploration, which is referred to as the Lou Bicking Award from the National Speleological Society. And like Louise, Jim has dedicated most of his life to exploring and studying caves around the world. And what I mean most of his life, he started when he was 4 years old, so I'm not even going to do the math on how old he is. But anyway, he's got a little older, and he would, as he got a little older, he would ride a bicycle throughout the Twin Cities up in the Minnesota area. Unfortunately, Minnesota is not the best state for caves because whatever caves were there were mostly removed by the last glacial epoch. But he eventually became connected with the National Speleological Society in Colorado in the 70s. At that time, Colorado cavers were interested in pushing beyond a sump. It's called Spring Cave in western Colorado. But most didn't even own a wetsuit. But Jim, on the other hand, he owned a wetsuit. And he was a certified scuba diver and had experience diving in cold water under ice. So he said, we got a sucker. We can get Jim. And with that background, immediately joined the exploration of Spring Cave, completing multiple sump dives far back into Spring Cave in Colorado. After that project, his caving interest blossomed across the United States, Mexico, Central America, and eventually into Papua New Guinea. In 1984, he became a park ranger at Wind Cave National Park in the Black Hills of South Dakota. He has led numerous survey teams into the cave, including mapping the 40th mile. But today, Wind Cave was one of the top 10 longest caves in the world with over 154 miles of map passage and still going. Jim has published nearly 300 articles on cave exploration, and he and Louise Hose were the initial co-editors of the Journal of Cave and Karst Studies, which has the largest circulation of any journal of speleological research. After the initial discovery and exploration of, Cueva de Louise, as you just heard from Louise, Jim founded and directed the NSS's Caves project of Tabasco, the NSS Caves of Tabasco project. Their teams of explorers and researchers began unraveling the toxic atmosphere in the cave and its chemo-autotropic ecosystems. The groundbreaking work in Louise as loose. I'm just having all kind of problems today. Has implications for research of extraterrestrial life. NASA supports research in that project. And I think, as I mentioned, and I think some of the explorers and speakers will today, that the biology in caves, the microbiology, whether of different species of organisms and microbes and whatever that have been discovered is astronomical. And when I mean astronomical, this is the kind of stuff that NASA and the space program will be searching for on other planets, and whether it's Mars or whether it's the moons of Europa or beyond. But what we're finding in caves is what are normally referred to as extremophiles, life forms that have developed in extreme environments of darkness, high acid contents, not carbon-based. So the work that Jim has been doing has led to a lot of that type of thing. Anyway, Jim is an award-winning, he's also a wildflower photographer. And here, I gotta get him out here. So in addition to the cave, he has, published 2 books. One is Common Wildflowers of the San Juan Mountains, which I have here, and Wildflowers of the Colorado's Western Slope, which looks like this one here. I do not believe that Emily has these, but there is a website that you can get to them, and Jim will be here throughout the day to be able to help you with that. His pictures appeared in the U.S. News, World Reports, Time, New Scientist, Weekly Reader, and various publications and textbooks and field guides. And then I mentioned here that even though that Jim has been a member of the Explorers Club for 46 years, which is remarkable, long time, he has never been to this building. He's never been to the headquarters. So this is his first time to the headquarters. Welcome home, Jim. And Jim has, he's brought with something that you're going to find very interesting that we'll talk about at the end of his presentation. Without further ado, Dr. Jim Pisarowicz. Jim.
Well, today I'm going to talk about the Kaijende caving expedition. Kaijende is a mountain in Papua New Guinea. The expedition was, let me find my buttons here, was organized at the first International Congress of Speleology held in the United States. That had been held in many other countries, but in 1981, I was at the conference, and word had come in that some geologists had taken a trip to a mountain in the central highlands of Papua New Guinea called Mount Kaijende, and that it was all limestone, the kind of rock that makes caves. And basically no one had actually been into that area doing any cave explorations, geological explorations. It was like the native peoples would come near that area, but it was at about 12,000 feet or so, and cold. So they couldn't really go down in there because most of the native people don't have warm clothes. They would cross the area to get from one valley to another, but wouldn't spend any time there because the conditions were just not conducive for them to live in that area. They would come up in that area, and there was some trees called pandanus trees that would have nuts, and they'd harvest them and then just immediately leave. So we said, well, let's go do that. Let's go to that area and take a look to see if there are any caves. And the area had been so remote that before the expedition, Louise started working on making topographic maps of the area. There were no topographic maps. We had some aerial photographs, and I remember being over at Louise's house and by her desk, and we're there basically making our own topographic maps. And once we got there, we would have something for reference other than our aerial photographs. So, of course, Papua New Guinea, there it is right here. And New Guinea is broken into Papua New Guinea over here and Irian Jaya on the other side. The Papua New Guinea side was administered by the Australians, and the Irian Jaya part by the Indonesians. So very, very different philosophies of how to organize things in those periods. So we're going to Papua New Guinea, and we're going to Mount Kaijende, which is sort of in the central highlands, sort of over in this middle area right in here. So very high, average elevation of the area is like 3,000 meters, and then Mount Kaijende is much, much taller than that. The expedition was organized out of the United States, but we had cavers from 5 different countries: United States, Australia, Switzerland, New England, and Papua New Guinea. And this expedition took place in 1981. Started off with early advance party into the area. So this is Donna Markowski, and she, along with several other expedition members, went to Papua, flew into the area on a jet coming over from the United States, and then moved to a smaller plane. And basically, they worked their way into the area where there was a gold mining operation in the town of Warrawari, and so they got to the area and basically cut their way through the jungle, making a trail for the rest of the expedition to get up into the mountains. And once they got up higher, they chopped off a landing strip for helicopters, because we were having to bring several tons of equipment for our particular expedition. Eventually, the rest of the expedition arrived in Mount Hagen, and then from Mount Hagen we took the Mount Hagen-Porgera Road, or also called the Highlands Highway, up to the gold mining camp. And the roads in Papua New Guinea are, they're interesting, and they get very, very difficult to travel on, because everything is really, really muddy. I remember talking with some of the guys at the gold mining camp, and says, you buy brand new Toyotas, how long do they last in these conditions? And they said, well, maybe 6 months. And in 6 months, they're just worn out, because everything would get mud and everything, and all the gears and everything. Even though they're trying to do maintenance, they just sort of. And he says, well, Toyotas are much better than any of the other vehicles they were using at the time. We were very. Is that the same Toyota that Louise was? No. Looks very much like the one we called. Yeah. Well, we were extremely fortunate to have this man helping out the expedition. His name was Graham Campbell. He was the mine operator superintendent. And so he allowed us to come in and base our operation out of the Placer gold mining camp in Warrawara. And so this was great, because we had a place to basically get everything together. We started getting everything together, and we had a big setback. We got word that all of the freeze-dried food, which was to be about 70% of the food for the expedition, was grabbed up by the Papuan customs, and says it was not allowed into the country. They said it was not. We could not assure that it was safe. And we went, what? And they said, well, no, we're trying to convince them that, it's the most processed food in the entire world. But they would not allow it into the country. So we had shipped it over, and that was to be like 70% of the food for a 30-person expedition for like 3 months. So immediately, the expedition had a problem. We don't have any food. And not only was that a problem, but when other members of the expedition arrived, it was like, we don't have any food, but we also don't have any money. So we basically, the leadership of the expedition hit up all of the people coming on the expedition, says, give us all your cash, because we need to buy food for this expedition to continue. And I remember coming in there and I said, well, I got a couple $100. I always travel with a couple $100 in cash on these sorts of things. And they said, we need all that money. So literally every single person in the expedition gave all of their cash to the expedition. And then they went looking for food for 30 people, you know, for several months. The only food that we could get was rice, canned corned beef, canned sardines. And so that was the major food that the expedition members ate. I mean, we still had some other food that made it through the customs. You know, we had to go into the local markets and buy up all of the food for the expedition. And fortunately, we were able to get all of that food together locally so that we would have food to support the rest of the expedition. So suddenly, you know, we had. Yeah, to this day, I don't like to eat a lot of rice. Most of the equipment was shipped over from the United States in these barrels, and we shipped about 14 these drums here. I think 7 tons of equipment. There's most of the caving equipment and such, and these were sent literally from California on the slow boat to Papua New Guinea. And you can take these down and we say, we want these to arrive at least by this date, you know, like 5 months from or 8 months from now. And they would put them on a boat, and it would take them so far, drop them off there. Next time there was a ship going a little bit closer, they'd put them on that ship a little bit closer, and then basically hop across the ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, and all of our equipment arrived in time. With the cost for shipping all that stuff was almost virtually nothing, you know, given what we were doing. So we picked up all that gear up on the coast, drove it in trucks to the gold mining camp, and there we hired a helicopter to start moving all of this equipment into the jungle. Now, our advance party had already gone into the jungle. They had made a landing pod for the helicopters to come in. We hired a helicopter company to pick up this stuff and fly it off into the jungle. And so here we're slinging some of our gear into the jungle to our helipad. Here's our helipad, and they would dump off all that gear. In the meantime, we did not use helicopters to move all the personnel into the jungle because it costs too much money. You know, it costs a lot of money to airlift all of that really heavy stuff. So the majority of the expedition just took their personal stuff and hiked in. You know, 2, maybe 3 days, depending upon you know, what it was like. So it was like you're working your way, but a trail had already been chopped by the advance party. You know, here's me coming down one of the muddy slopes, going through the jungle, and it's a wonderful place. I mean, I've always thought about going to Papua New Guinea. One of my advisors on my PhD did his work not in Papua New Guinea, but in Irian Jaya, and he was an anthropologist. He's a member of the Explorers Club, and was one of the last people to make a first contact with Native peoples. Not been with, we've seen Western civilization before. We hired a bunch of local people, and you know, so they carried and did a bunch of the work for us. Unfortunately, we did not realize that where they set up the base camp was right where 3 tribes came together. And so our guys that we hired, I think were from Porgera, and if they were out doing something and they ran into any tribe member from other tribes in the particular area where we were working, you know, those other people would try to kill them. So a lot of our guys sort of wouldn't go out of base camp unless they had one of us, you know, which we were called Europeans to them. We were white. And if one of us was with them, the other people wouldn't ambush them, so to speak. And now it was time to set up a base camp, because we're going to be there for several months. We're in Papua New Guinea. We went there in the southern hemisphere winter because it's drier. It's the dry season. You know, after I was there for a while, you know, where it rained literally every single day, except for a few differences. I went to talk with one of the local guys, and says, it's the dry season. Yet it has rained every day. And he says, well, what's the difference between the wet season? The guy says, oh, well, that's easy. He says, in the dry season, it rains every day. But in the wet season, it rains all day, every day. And that was the difference. So we were where it rained every day, but not all day, every day, which is fortunate. So we're working at putting together a base camp, you know, cutting down trees and getting logs and laying them out and building huts for us to stay in and huts for us to put equipment. I mean, here's how you pound in a log in the ground. It's called the jump method. Everybody you get 3 or 4 guys, and they hold themselves up with a long stick, and then everybody jumps together and then lands on the log and goes boom, pushes it down into the ground. At the end of doing all that, you cover it all over with a roof, and then put on top of it what they refer to as a sail, you know, like a big tarp over that, and that eventually becomes a number of houses. So here's one of our sleeping huts that we build there. And then, and after a while, we've got a camp that looks like this. And, you know, we've got a place to cook, sleeping huts, places to store all of our gear and such. And once all of that's done, we can now go through all the drums we have and sort out all the equipment. We had a shortwave radio and a generator for emergencies. It got cold there at night. It's down to minus 6.5 Celsius at night, 20 degrees. And one of the reasons why you don't get a lot of native Papuan people living there, because it's like at night, you know, this is, you know, it's really hard when you don't own clothes. We had to bring clothes for the guys that we had that worked for us throughout the expedition, because there was, you know, they'd be too cold all the time. And we set up we had a nice kitchen to bake bread and everything. Here's Louise, actually. You know, Louise is from L.A. You know, we have a sponsor from Mexican food place. You know, they let that food into the country. The native people were really on the prowl all the time for something good to eat. And here's a bunch of the fellows, and they found this tree kangaroo up in a tree. They would know it was in the tree because they'd walk through the jungle, and they could smell that the tree kangaroo was up there and defecating. Well, tree kangaroo, these are really good. They chop down the tree, the tree would come down. They jump the tree kangaroo, and that becomes part of dinner. Yeah, there's possum. What did I do? Okay. Here's an opossum. We had 2 physicians on the expedition. You know, like, in these kinds of conditions, if you get a scratch or something, you don't treat it right away. It becomes septic really, really fast. And here is our whole party. Now, other than when we first got there, the whole party is never in field camp. We basically would be in field camp. We'd always have at least 4 or 5 people in field camp, and then we'd break off into groups, and people would grab up a bunch of food, grab up a bunch of caving equipment, and head off in the jungle for a week to 10 days. And when they either found a cave or not, they don't find it in a week or so, they come back to camp. Or if you're out there and you use up all of your equipment, like rope and such, and it's like, oh God, we got a cave that's still going, still needs to be explored, and then run out of rope, well, now you have to come back to the field camp. But it takes 2 or 3 days to hike back to the field camp. So that we have constant numbers of people going in and out of the field camp as they're off exploring. So this is looking at our field camp down here. this whole area. This is the top of Mount Kaijende. It's all karst pinnacles, limestone pinnacles. They're like swords sticking up into the air, and they're very, very sharp, very difficult to travel across. We actually, members of our expedition, climbed that for the first time all the way up to the top. And so here are some aerial photographs. So our base camp was right in this little clearing here. Here is the top of the mountain. And we would keep track of sort of where we were by these clearings. So there's clearings and the rest of this is heavy jungle. So we would go out looking for caves. We'd hike out of the base camp. We'd start off by walking along through this area looking for holes in the ground. And if there's a hole in the ground, of course, we would go down into it. So that's the essence of caving. And here we are, we're making our way through the jungle. Of course, it's very, very thick jungle. And, so you're doing that looking for a hole in the ground. Finding big holes is that much easier, where the ground has slumped down into the ground. Or where there's a river flowing and disappearing. Or the reverse, where the water's coming out of a cave. So that's what we're looking for as we're traversing through this area. So it was much, much easier to travel, in those clearing areas. The clearing, you'd say, well, looks pretty easy. But a lot of the clearing was this really high, what's called kunai grass, razor sharp stuff. When I was hiking through the kunai, I'd wear bicycling gloves because what would happen is it would cut your fingers or your hands right as the grass gets in between your digits and coming down to the end, and it would just slice it like knives running through your hand all the time. But if you had a glove on there like a bicycling glove, you've got leather in the center there, but your fingertips are good for grabbing onto stuff. So we'd either go out into the areas looking for caves. So a lot of or keeping track of the caves and such, were based upon the clearings that they're in. So we started off with the first clearing, and then we'd work that, trying to look for caves there, go to the second clearing, the third clearing. Eventually we were out to the seventh clearing, and eventually we're into the next mountain range looking for caves. So let's take a look in the first clearing. One of the first caves we found was a cave called Lik Ananda. And Ananda means cave in the local dialect. And here we are heading off to explore this cave. Here we are at the entrance of the cave, and we get into the cave, and we're crawling along. Now, all the caves, as we explore them, they are being mapped. We're using a tape, pulling a tape from point to point in the cave. Alan here is making notes, keeping track, how far is it from this point to the next point? What's the compass bearing from here to there? Whether the cave is dipping up and down and how many degrees. And then they, on graph paper, would draw in 3 dimensions what the cave looks like in terms of distance. And then when you get to the next point, you went to the next point, doing that as you continue through the cave. A lot of people say, how do you keep from getting lost? Well, as you go through the new cave, the virgin cave, when you turn around, you've got a map to get out. Because literally you made the map to get out as you went in. Among people that are pretty experienced cavers, getting lost, I don't want to say is not impossible, but not very likely. Here's Ellen making notes into our notebooks. Here I am in the cave. And we're caving in these sort of plastic caving suits, because all the caves are really wet, really muddy. Here's one of the guys. We called this cave Lik Ananda. And it got the name Lik because the survey instruments would get so full of mud, you couldn't clean them off. Because after a while, there's mud everywhere on your body, including underneath your suit. So now you have to be able to look through this instrument to see if it's, what's the degrees like this, or what's the degrees up and down like this. And the instrument is just packed with mud. You cleaned it off by licking it off. But that was really appropriate, because in Pidgin English, the native language across all of Papua New Guinea, lik means small. So this was a small cave. And it was a small cave. So Liklikananda, one of the first caves we mapped on the trip. It was always interesting, you know, like when you come out of the cave and then it might be a later part of the day or it's in the morning. Every morning I marveled coming out, and this is what you'd see. You know, like you're out in the jungle and there's fog hanging out in the jungle, and you know, oftentimes I'd look out and say, man, this is what it looked like if there was a dinosaur out there. You know, and you know, like a lot of the trees, they're not the normal kind of trees like you see around here. These are giant, some of these are giant tree ferns. They're ferns that are like, you know, like 20 feet high, you know, 15 meters or more high in places. And then, of course, you're off in the more barren areas, much easier to traverse. So after being there for a while, we did most of our looking on the edges of these clearings. And as you do that, you start to find other caves. Occasionally, you'll find a little hole. Here's Carlin going down, taking a look to see what's down this little hole. I always make jokes with friends and says, you know, I travel around the world, go to the other side of the world, and when I'm going there, I'm looking for a hole in the ground. There's a hole in the ground. And when I find one, I'm going to crawl in it to see what's down in there. And that's what we're doing, because we're explorers. No one knows what's in that hole until you go in there. You know, and that hole might be just a little hole and it dead ends, or it might be a cave that drops down very, very deep. It might be a giant chamber. You might get into the cave and there's a roaring river flowing through that particular cave. And you never know till you go in there. And then, of course, you have to document that. Like, you know, you're looking at the topographic map that we made because we wanted to go there. And we put the pin in and say, oh, and in this cave, this is what's there. And you have a set of notes, what the cave is like, and all the things that you found in the cave. Were there bats in the cave? Was it a burial for local people in this particular cave? You know, you never know till you're there. And then once you're there, then you take the notes and provide that documentation. I found an easy way. I just did this the other day. We were coming from Chris's house downtown yesterday, the day before. It was raining a lot, and a couple of people had their Gore-Tex on. I brought an umbrella. I was dry. You know, the people with the Gore-Tex on, the part that with their jacket, they're dry, but of course the rain runs off that jacket to the edge of the jacket, and now your pants are wet. So we often use, even though we're wearing these plastic caving suits, it was pretty nice walking around underneath an umbrella, you know, so that because otherwise the rain is coming in your head and it goes down your hair and gets inside of your plastic suit. So it's like, you know, if you really want to stay, and it's like I say, it's cold. You know, at night, you know, it's like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, -6 or 7 Celsius. So, I mean, that's below freezing, you know, so you want to stay as dry as you can. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong button here. Well, here we are in the first clearing. We find another cave. We call this Ipana Hole, another hole. So after a while, we're starting to talk Pidgin English. And Pidgin English, the language of the entire country of Papua New Guinea, is based upon English, Dutch, Neo-Melanesian, and such. One of the things I liked about Pidgin English, like unlike other places I've spent time in, where I had learned Spanish or Portuguese or whatever it is, you know, at various times I was pretty fluent in Totonac and Nawa, some of the native languages in Mexico. But one of the things that you often have to do is be able to count in whatever that language was. Neo-Melanesian or Pidgin English was really easy. This is where you count there: 1 pella, 2 pella, 3 pella. You just say the English word and put pella after it. You know, and it's like, oh, okay, you go and you want to buy a bunch of cans of whatever in the market. You say, yeah, I got to take 20 pellas of that. It makes transactions a little bit easier. Here we are in an area looking for a cave, and right over here, there's a little cave entrance, and we go over there, and this is Ipana Hole, another hole cave, and you get at the entrance and look in that, well, there it is. And nice size entrance, you can walk into it, comes in there, nice passageway that runs off for a way, and of course we map all of that and then come out if it doesn't continue, and again, you pop out and it's like, what's that? Can't do this thing. And you see this site again, it's like, oh, the dinosaur site. You know, and like you can see the giant tree ferns and such in there, and it's like, oh, that's so cool. We found a little shelter cave. You know, shelter cave is a cave that just is an indentation, maybe keeps the rain off, but not usually very, very extensive. But we mark all of those down. And whoops. So we found the shelter cave here. And there's Paul. It's in one of the shelter caves. In this particular shelter cave, we found a human skull. You know, the group that we were with. I mean, we have, you know, biologists, geologists, and all these other you know, ologists kinds of people, in addition to the speleologists, and you know, so we have some of our experts along with us looked at this and says it's a boy and between 5 and 8 years old, and you know, we don't know anything else about this particular person other than that. Well, as we finished finding a bunch of caves in the first clearing, we moved to the second clearing, and so we move on to the second clearing, and we found a cave. And this was cave number 131. We didn't come up with a name for it. We just called it cave 131. And we looked in there and says, oh, a nice hole. Climbed down into the hole. It went down into a nice tunnel that went down and ended in what's referred to as a sump. A cave passageway is completely filled with water. And if you want to go continue any further than that, you have to grab your scuba equipment. We did not bring that kind of equipment because this is sort of a reconnaissance kind of an expedition. Back in clearing 2, another one, we found another cave, Catapus Ananda. Catapus is the pidgin word for helicopter. We spotted the entrance of this cave in a helicopter when we were helicoptering gear in, marked it on our homemade topographic maps, and then went out and tried to find it. And this was a nice cave, you know, very nice entrance. We walked into the entrance, you know, beautiful sunlight coming in, turn the other direction, head off there, and into a series of other passageways. Lots of swifts and such lived in the cave. So they would come fly in for the night, fly out at various times of day. And then the other thing, you found bats in some of the caves. Or you'd find outside flying foxes. You know, very large bat-like creatures. I mean, some of these would have wingspans like this.
Were you concerned with histoplasmosis at all in any of these caves?
No one got any histoplasmosis. Yeah, we didn't have any incidents of that. You know, we didn't have any way of dealing with that, you know. You wouldn't know until after you got out. It's like, oh yeah, now you got histoplasmosis. We had ornithologists on the trip. I think we found about 75 different species of birds. Every species of bird that was already known became a major range extension. And it's Tom Strong, who's the ornithologist. He wasn't an ornithologist. Well, he's always been an ornithologist, but eventually got his PhD in ornithologist. Judith Bateman, one of the Australian cavers there. You know, here's a friendly fantail bird, a sooty honey eater, and then we had our mascot bird. This is fun. Just a baby was found here. Neil Ryan. He was our fixer. Every expedition needs a fixer, somebody that knows the local ins and outs to get things done. And you know, I can sort of, because he was the fixer, he's the one that actually allowed us to have the expedition. Because Papua New Guinea, the money in Papua New Guinea is the kina. And the kina has no value outside of Papua New Guinea. And he worked in Papua New Guinea, so when he got paid in kina. Now he eventually wants to leave, right? Eventually, you know, even if he loves Papua New Guinea, he eventually wants to leave. But after working there for years, you got like 10,000 kina. You can't leave the country with that. So what we did is we set a fair market value of the stuff that he was buying for us. We gave him dollars or pounds or whatever, and he paid for it with kina. So at the end of the expedition, he has gotten rid of a lot of his kina and ended up with you know, I don't want to say real money because kina is a real money in that country, but now he has money that he can take out of the country. And the only way he did that was because we provided that money to, and he provided us then the goods, like all that food we had to buy. So very important in well, here's what the ribbon-tailed strapia looks like when it's you see these flying by. The tails of these are like a meter or longer, and they'd fly like this with the big tail hanging out behind them. And this is sort of the mascot. And in fact, we'll talk about that later. So after we were there for a while, we kept thinking about all the pinnacles behind the base camp, and we decided some members of the staff decided we need to climb the mountain. And so they worked their way. It took several days to work their way through these high pinnacles. You'd be walking along, and if you're not careful, you're going to fall into a hole there that could be 100 meters deep. So if you're very, very careful, the limestone is very, very sharp. But once you get to the top of the mountain, you can look out over the landscape. So our base camp is right in here. Here is clearing 1. Here's clearing 2, and so on. And so most of the looking for caves occurred in these clearings, and then checking along the sides of these clearings or things that stuck out, because these are maybe places where you can get into the limestone and find the cave. Like this. I look out and said, there's this big hunk of limestone there. This is in clearing 3, and right next to that is this pit. Dropped down about 50 meters, 150 feet. No big cave there, but something that we documented. In clearing 3, we found what we started referring to as the first cave, and here's the entrance of that cave. We mapped that out. Some of these caves are large, some of them are smaller. In clearing 3, we found the cave called Ugo Ananda. I don't remember even what Ugo was stand for. Maybe it's the name that, I can't remember that. Louise, was that one of the porters that we hired? Maybe. But this cave was a cave where the water flows into the cave. So we're in the water, working our way to where the water is flowing down into the cave. And you get past the entrance, and you stand there and look out. Well, there's the entrance. And there's this nice stream in the cave. You climb up high in these areas, and you see all these logs up in the ceiling. Some of these caves, I think the most extreme result of it raining, one cave, it rained like 2 or 3 centimeters, maybe an inch or so on the surface, and the water in the cave rose 150 meters. So you had to be really careful when you went into the caves. So a lot of times we would cave in the morning because it usually rained in the afternoon. So you'd head off into the cave right in the morning, get as far as you can, and you look at your watch. It says, "Oh, it's starting to get afternoon. It's maybe going to start to rain. I think we need to get out of here." Because if you're one of these caves where a small amount of rain can bring the water level up really high, and you can tell the water does go really high because you climb up into some of these passageways, and there's big trees jammed into the ceiling. So that cave filled all the way up with water, probably in the wet season when it rains more. But there they all are, and you don't want to be in that particular cave when that situation has. So again, here's some more caves. We're following the water. One of the big things about exploring caves is follow the water, because the water is what makes the cave. The water dissolves out that limestone, and if the water's going down there, that's where you want to go. That's where you want to go. There's other places you should go too, but it's like that's one of the first things you decide. Well, here it goes down, the water comes around the corner, takes a drop off. Well, now we need some ropes. So we need to get our descending gear or climbing gear. This went down a drop off, comes down into another little spot. And then there's another drop-off, and we went down that drop-off, and now you're in a giant cave passageway. And so we'd map our way down these passageways until they either ended, or we ran out of all of the equipment, or that you find this at the end of your supply of food for that particular trip, and you say, well, we'll come back. Well, maybe, because maybe you find something better on the way out. But everything you do is documented as you do it. So you don't go in and go running down there and say, wow, that was a cool cave, and come out. When you come out, it's because you've made a map of that cave. That's exploration. That's not like just fun, doing it for fun. You're doing it for science. And to get out of this cave, you have to climb up the ropes that you've set to get down into the various drops. Well, we're now in clearing 3, and we're going to go into a cave which is Abalu Kandu. Kandu is another native word for cave. And head into the cave here. Oh, all the water is going through there. If you go underwater, maybe you will pop up on the other side, and there's some more cave passageways. You don't know until you do that. In this particular case, Peter here goes underwater, pulls himself or swims along, and pops up. And it's air-filled cave passageway and can continue. You don't want to do that too far. And of course, if you're going in is much easier than coming out. So if you swim underwater and it doesn't come up pretty fast, it's time to get the hell out of there, because the only way out is where you came in, and under those kinds of conditions. This one beyond this will continue for another like 100 feet or so. More passageways. We're trucking down the passageways. Here. You drop down a drop-off that was about 8 meters into another passageway. Again, you can see wet all the way to the ceiling. That's why we have all these ropes with us. Noel here is on a cable ladder. Not my favorite way of getting down a drop-off. Louise talked about that earlier, her friend Jim Eyre. And most of us like the single rope technique. Went down there. Passageway continues. You're just always excited. You never know. It's that idea of what's around the next corner. And when you go caving, you do that all the time. What's wrong? Let me go see. Let me go see. Let me go see. And again, that's exploration. All of these caves are, like John was saying, virgin caves. People, I don't know if that's maybe it was Louise, but these are places that no one has ever been, ever before. So when you're walking into any of these caves, you're walking every one of those steps. No one has been there, and whatever you're seeing, no one has ever seen until you were there. Sends chills up my spine. But this continued, so here we're continuing down the passageway, and it just keeps going, and then maybe in this case, more passageway, and then it ends in a pit. But this is another cave that come down. You actually intersected another cave. So we could have come down this and went back this way, and that would have been just what we did. But if we went down that way, repel, and gone that way, you get into the new cave passageways that now we're there. Oh, we need to go over there. So I mean, very, very exciting. You never know what's going to happen. Well, one day we got up and we had a fire running across the clearing. This is the clearing right by camp. When I was there, I says, how can I have a fire? It's raining like every single day. I think we had 2 days where it didn't rain. And in those 2 days, things became so dry, because these plants are not used to ever holding any water. And now we had a fire. This is set by the local people. One of the things the local people do, I don't think they did it maliciously, because we were at the other end of this clearing. But they traverse the upper elevation areas by coming up through the jungles, crossing the clearings, just like we're doing, to get to the other side. And if they don't burn it off every once in a while, the jungle will come in and take over all of it. So when the conditions are right, they're on their way across this clearing, they go, oh, time to start a fire. And the fire then burns off all that grass. Everything comes back really quick. Here we actually had to go off and try to beat off the fire before it came in and burned down our camp. But this is what that clearing looked like before the fire, and here it is after the fire. It's like just a day. Just burns through all of that kind of stuff. But that's actually a necessary thing for the area, and it recycles all of the nutrients of all those plants and everything. Back out to clearing 3, looking for another cave. Surprise River Cave. Here's Carol in the entrance to the cave. Goes down, and this was a really well decorated. You know, the kind of cave that people think about. You want to go to a tour in a cave to see all the pretty stuff in the cave. So this one was pretty well decorated with soda straws and stalactites and passageways, flowstone, stream passageway, not a big river, just beautiful cave. Yeah, no one ever seen it till we got in there, discovered the underwater stream and followed it off. Let's keep doing this some more. Here we're up to clearing 4. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and here's a cave which we didn't survey, but we did go down the pit. The pit here went down 100 meters, 300 feet. But no big cave passageway there, but just 300 feet straight. So cool. One of the main things that we as cave scientists do is to try to figure out where the water goes. You know, so here's a stream that's flowing along the surface, and what we do to figure that out is we have various kinds of dyes, different colors and other sorts of things. And we dump the dyes in at the top of the mountain here, and then we go down to the bottom of the mountain or further down the mountain and see if that dye shows up there. Because if it does, that means that this is connected to what's below. This is, you know, what Louise does. They dump the dye up here, and it comes out down there, and it's like, well, they haven't surveyed all the passageways in the middle, but you know it's the same system. You might not be able to explore that middle section where it's all going to be underwater, but that is the same system, because the water goes in here, it comes out there. You know that in between those two, there's a big cave system. In this case, we're dumping the various kinds of dyes, and we keep track of when we dump the dyes, what kind of dyes we dump, that kind of stuff. And meantime, later on, or maybe at the same time, other members of the crew are at the caves lower down in the mountains, 1,500 meters lower, 4,000, 5,000 feet lower. And if this water comes out there, this color, you know that there's a connection between here and there. And then you can say, okay, there's a hydrologic system. It's this deep here. And we know because we did stuff like this. Okay, we're backing up in clearing 3. Too dark Ananda. Too dark. Dark. It's really dark. Here we found this particular pit in clearing 3, 55 meters deep. 160, 170 feet deep. So you got to throw down your rope, rappel down there. It's cool when you get to the bottom. You look up and see how the sun is shining down. It's just beautiful. And then you go off in the passageways. And this one went into another big room. Goes down into some pools. Goes down to some interesting erosional features. In this particular cave, there's Carol doing that. Oh, we need to find another one. Also in clearing 3. Number 1 cave. Number 1. Excellent cave. You get into the entrance and it's like, wow, nice big entrance. And big stalactites and stalagmites. It looks like, we would call this the jail bars. You get through that and it leads to an area which we call this big area with a lot of stalactites and stalagmites, Wonderland. As Carol's looking at Wonderland. Here's Noel, one of our physicians. We had 2 physicians, one American and one Swiss. And they tried to make sure at least one of the physicians was always in the base camp. So if anybody out in the field would have any difficulties and they sent a runner back to the base camp, again, we're in the days before satellite radios, before cell phones. If you need to get information, somebody has to run from where you are to base camp to tell them what's going on. But again, beautiful formations in this cave, including cave pearls. Well, as I said, we dump the dye up high, and then we have to go down low. And so some of the work that was done, it was done in the resurgences where the water reappears further down the mountains in this particular cave called Resurgence Cave. And a bunch of passageways there with water flowing out. And if you do enough of this kind of stuff, you can sort of, and use different colored dyes, and you see that different colored dyes show up at different places. After a while, you get to have a good idea, or a pretty good idea, of where the water is flowing underground. That's usually where the caves are. You might not be able to go into those passageways, physically, but you know that there's a connection. So there's a cave system there. Here we are off into clearing 7. Remember, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we're starting to get further and further out there. And here we find a cave called Kinakana Ananda. It was in the big clearing in number 7. And to get in that, you had to go through a little squeezeway where the water was flowing through. Pops up on the other, coming out on the other side. And there was a bunch of passageways there. We mapped all of those. Well, we're now out to 7. We're way far out there. Well, what happened at this time, we're getting further into the expedition, and a couple of the Swiss cavers decided, what about that other mountain range over there? And we're still mucking around with the stuff on Mount Kaijende, but they found an old hunting track, and they followed the hunting track through the jungle and up to the next mountain. And when they get over to the next mountain, they find more caves. And so from that last clearing, Mount Laurel is way out there in the distance. And they get there, they found a big head wall like this, and right at the bottom, they find caves. And they go down into the caves and go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they get down like 350 meters, 400 meters, even over 1,000 feet deep. They map out 3.5 kilometers, several miles of cave passageways at that point. And then the word comes back to us, big discovery. Everybody in camp is really excited. The problem is we ran out of rope. We ran out of rope. So the expedition had lots of rope, but it's way back in the base camp. So not only have we run out of rope, but we've run out of food. So we need more rope, we need more food to supply the exploration further. And Louise and I were in base camp at the time, and we said, okay, we'll grab up rope and food. So both of us were carrying packs from 40 to 50 kilos, 90 to 100-pound packs, and we're going to start trudging with these really big packs across all these other clearings, and eventually trying to find the trail that takes us to connect with our friends way out there. And several-day hike out there. I don't know if you've ever been to a place like being in the jungle and you got to cook your food. You ever start a fire in a jungle where it rains every single day? The native people do it. I mean, we pull out our little Bics. I was like, I got a Bic. Get the fire going. And I can't get the fire going. The native people walk over and they laugh at us. These guys must be stupid. And we are. We're stupid in their environment. And they would do something, and before you know it, the fire is burning. What the hell is that? These guys don't have Bics. The way that they keep the fire burning is that the night before they have a fire, and they take a couple sticks and they pick up a coal. They take like a big banana leaf and stick it in the middle, fold it up, and they stick it under their armpit. And then they walk. And every once in a while they pull it out and go, stick it under their armpit, walk, do that all day long to wherever it is they're going. And when they get to where they want to be, they open this up, put that down, and starting a fire. We can't do it with our Bics. Yeah, okay. So Louise and I are making our way out to this camp with these really big packs. And we, I'm moving the wrong direction here. Why can't I go backwards? the red one, okay. So not only can I can't start a fire with a bitch, but so we're walking and we it's really hard walking 100-pound pack through the jungle like this. So we stopped at one place and we decided, well, we're going to camp out here for the night. And so we get a fire eventually burning, and we look off in the distance and we see a bunch of people starting walking over towards us. And we says, oh, look, we haven't seen any people out here for a while. And these guys come walking, several guys come walking into our camp, sort of like this. But there's also, you can see other people in the background. And they came into our camp, and they say to Louise and I in very broken English, we have come to steal from you. And it's like, what? Louise and I are like, well, we need to be really nice with these guys. We're really friendly. And says, what? And he says, oh no, we've come to steal from you. We've come to steal from you. And while they're saying this, we can see other people coming closer. This is the advanced group people here. We've come to steal from you. And they kept saying it over and over again. Now we're like a day and a half or 2 days from our base camp. These guys are going to come to steal from us. We know from talking with some of the local people, they still, despite what the government said at the time, they don't do cannibalism, but the local people say they do. And they've come to steal from us. Oh no. Oh no, they come to steal from us. And after several minutes of this, they then, and we said, what do you really want? And the guy says, no, we've come to sell to you. And what they were doing is that they knew that we had a camp. Everybody knows after a while that there was a bunch of Europeans, so to speak, over there. And they've been here for the last month and a half. And so they brought sweet potatoes with them. Yeah, this would be great. Because meanwhile on camp they're eating canned sardines and canned corned beef. And so we said, well, there's that way. So they decide, we confirm that that's the direction to go with the food. And they'll buy all the food over there. So they set up camp and they had women and kids and everything else there. And we got a bigger fire going. And while the fire's burning, these guys start to chant. And they chant, this is beautiful. And after doing that for a little bit, they stop. And they look at Louise and I, and we look at each other and say, I think they want us to chant back. And we're like, what song is it? And we're like, and the song that we sang was ready. Rudolph the Red-Nosed. Bog holes in there. And they're sort of like glacial tarns. And I'm walking along and I slip and I fall in one of those bog holes. Fall forward with a 100-pound pack, twist my leg, and it's like, ah! I'm hurt. So we set up one of our tents. One of our workers, we send them back to the base camp. Say, somebody's injured out here. Fortunately, both doctors happen to be in base camp at the same time. Takes our porter guy a half a day to get back to the base camp. Another day for the doctors to make their way. They have their pack with all their orthopedic stuff and all their drugs and everything else. And Dr. Sloan writes up a thing. Says, I think you rip your tendons and ligaments in your knee. And there's no way that this can be fixed in any hospital in Papua New Guinea. So he's writing out a thing. I should go to Sydney. And so the word goes back, okay, call a helicopter. evacuation insurance. You know, so they're calling down to the helicopter firms. So emergency, send up a helicopter. The helicopter people says, when they say, we've got insurance. Helicopter company says, great. When we get there, we're expecting cash. $10,000. $10,000. No one has any money because we had to collect all the cash from everybody to buy food for the expedition. So they're going back and forth on the radio. You know, are you going to send out the helicopter? Well, fortunately, Graham Campbell, the guy at the gold mining company, after a while hears this back and forth chatter, and he eventually just calls the helicopter company and says, my company will guarantee payment. They sent the helicopter out. You know, we'll work it out later. So there I am, you know, get me all ready to go, and I have a pretty good smile there. And they send out the helicopter. Well, the helicopter comes in and says, we have to go to Sydney. We don't have our passports; they're back in camp, and our tickets, they're back in camp too. So they had to pick us up. So Louise and I got picked up. Gone back to camp to get our tickets and passports. And at this time, the elevator said, or the helicopter company says, we don't have enough fuel to get to where that jet is to take us to Sydney. So they had to fly over to some other place to get refueled, and then from there they flew us over to Mount Hagen, which is the nearest place. Well, in Mount Hagen, you only get jets going to Sydney twice a year. They had to hold the jet entire day for us to get there. We come walking in the helicopter, and there's the jet that'll take me to Sydney, go to the hospital. We land almost right next to the jet. We walk up to the jet, and give them my passport and my tickets and everything else. The stewardess looks at it and says, "These tickets are no good. This is a special group rate, only good on these dates, you know, at the end of the expedition." And we're arguing with him. She goes in and gets the pilot. The pilot comes up and says, "Tickets are no good." And finally, I had my wallet and hadn't had any money in it. And I should have contacted Visa. And I pull out my Visa card and says, "Will you take this?" She looked at it and says, "Yep." And that was in the day where they do this, does that, hands me the receipt, and Louise and I are off to Sydney. We get there, eventually we end up at the Royal North Shore Hospital. You know, actually that's their orthopedic area. We ended up with the doctor that in Sydney treats the rugby players. So we know that it's good. You know, those rugby players get ripped up pretty bad. And eventually I rehabbed. Spent another month in Australia. We went out and did stuff, but you know the rest of the expedition was there. They eventually came through. But I mean, my memories being out in the jungle with the clouds, the native people that we ran into, perfect all the time. Here is the book, a dictionary, book the long pigeon. That's how you that's the word for dictionary. Thinking of Mount Kaijende, and just in memory of, go back a couple. Sorry, there's a copy of the flag of Papua New Guinea, and before I came out here, I had my nails done. The red nails have a bird of paradise exactly like that. Black, and my other nails, they're black with the
And on that note, thank you very much. Louise did said you were a little bit on the. However, Jim has something in his possession, and I don't know if we can bring the lights up instead of staring into this. Richard, you're here. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, this is Richard Garriott. Garriott has been the president of the Explorers Club for about 5 years now, I believe. 4 plus. And I talked about Explorers Club flags and how precious they are and how important they are, and they all come with a history of travel. They're recorded, they're kept track of. What some flags don't return, they're missing. In fact, I'll let Richard explain this, but Jim is directly or indirectly responsible for one of them being missing for 42 years.
41 years.
Excuse me, 41 years and counting. Anyway, I'll let Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, well, you've seen in the room here some of these are the retired flags. After they go out on enough expeditions, we're worried about losing them. We retire them like a sports jersey. And one time after I was going on my second flag expedition, I requested to take the same flag I'd taken the first time, and the archivist said, "Well, I'm so sorry, but that flag actually has gone missing." And I'm like, "What do you mean missing?" It was like, not this one, but it said, the person who took it out last didn't bring it back. And I'm going like, oh, wait, does that mean like they were on a ship and the ship went down with all hands and the crew was killed and the flag was lost with them? Or does that mean they actually came back alive and somehow didn't bring the flag back? And they were like, well, no, they came back, and it was Sir David Himpleman Adams who was the person who took the flag. And I was like, oh, that is not cool. And I was like, how often does it happen? And it turns out we've had 20 or 30 lost flags in the history of the club, and this is one of them. This has
the longest history of being lost, I think.
No, I think there's one more. Admiral Byrd's flag that we got back from Antarctica goes a little further back. But what's funny is, once I heard this was happening, I created something downstairs called the Plaque of Lost and Missing Flags, affectionately known as the Plaque of Shame. And it was no surprise, as soon as I put a plaque of shame in the bar of the Explorers Club where everyone can see it, suddenly flags started getting returned. But weirdly, when we heard about this flag, it turns out that flag wasn't on the plaque. And the reason is an interesting clerical error, because Dr. Mark Minton, was he with you?
No, but he's a peer from Austin, Texas.
Okay, so he's the person on record of having taken the flag last, and so they didn't know to track you down. And so there was a clerical error that presented. But by the way, this flag number 168, started going to Greenland, then Antarctica, Transasia, Colombia, went to South Pacific, Pan American Expedition, Cameroon, a number of caves, Vietnam, Hautula, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, it's very exciting to get this flag back. I had to make a flag number 168, placard to take off the plaque of shame.
Never made its way onto.
Yes, so you don't need to be forgiven because you were never charged, so to speak. But we're glad to have it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Where's our photographers here?
Well, I predict this one will now be retired also. So this, again, just for the infamy of being lost for so long.
Well, this is also timely. And while Richard is here, I've had the pleasure of emceeing this event for several years, and it's an honor to be in this room. And of course, above the door over here is Admiral Peary's sled that went to the poles. Very historic thing that was almost 100 years ago. And I have a brother that lives in Chicago, and he was recently to some estate sale and found a publication that I think should belong here. This is a 100-year publication, I think it's 99 years, but anyway, of Admiral Byrd's expedition to the Antarctic, and it seems like this original publication should be part of the archival collection here at the club.
Fantastic, thank you. Can I steal the mic again for a minute, too? So by the way, the only other flag that was not on the plaque of shame that was returned is the flag from this expedition. And so Admiral Byrd, when he made Little America down there in Antarctica, he got called back to World War II, and so he left camp early, left the flag with his team in Antarctica, and it was then lost to us, but got packed up and handed down through crew members and descendants until finally it showed up at auction about 6 months ago. Wow. Yeah.
So a lot of great things. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Jim. You realize that's compound interest on that flag being gun. Okay, one thing before we break for lunch. If you may remember when we did the slideshow, there was a note of memory to Lynn Ott. Lynn is a dear member of the National Speleological Society who's helped on this particular Tales from Dark Places for years. Unfortunately, she passed away here in November. Unfortunately, she passed away in November, and we're dedicating this entire presentation here today. Now, interesting and ironically, her birthday is tomorrow. And Joey, are you here? Yes. Joey Fagan will have just a brief word of who she is and what we're going to do here at lunch.
Sounds good. I tell you, let me go ahead and I'll maybe sit at the podium. That'd be good. Yeah, no, Lynn's a longtime caver. She
Put the mic right in front of your mouth.
okay, like this. Got you covered. No, you know, Lynn's like an old friend. She started caving back as a D.C. area caver back in the early 70s. So she's been at this a while. She's really passionate about caves, cavers, bats. She was really loved bats. I can't emphasize that enough. She was very helpful in a lot of the Tales from Dark Places events that we've had over the last few years. So she was somebody who was just really very empathetic. She would stand up and take charge of things, you know, help out when maybe others were kind of sitting back there with the deer in the headlights kind of thing going, and Lynn would step forward and help out. Say tomorrow's her birthday. We've got a little birthday cake that we're going to have to show it. We don't have enough for everybody to get a piece of it, but we thought we would have that just as a device to kind of honor Lynn in her remembrance. Also, her significant other, her partner for many years, Gene Harrison, has been active in a lot of these events and has helped as well. He was stricken with kidney stones, so kind of like cave pearl kind of deal going for Gene. And the prognosis is good for him, but he wasn't able to join us today. But she was very passionate about a particular cave. It's called Cricket Maze Cave, and she actually had purchased that cave, and they have a Cricket Maze Cave Association that conserves that property. And here later, when the weather really kind of warms up, they plan to have her ashes and to spread those on the surface above Cricket Maze. So that's a fitting way to remember Lynn. I think there will probably be some memorial or celebration at the NSS convention. It'll be happening in late June, upstate New York. But that's all I have now. But you know, kind of think good thoughts and remember Lynn. She was a special person.
Lunch is served. It's right across the hallway in the library, so please make yourself at home and we'll reconvene.
There's an expression. The expression is eat the mic.
Okay.
You had it down here.
Mhm.
If you use a microphone of this type, put it right in front of your mouth. You could hear you just fine when it was there. When it's down here, you can't hear anything.
Okay. Thanks.
Usually I'm used to wearing them.
They're more less directional. They're easier to use. This type of microphone, the technique we teach is eat the mic. It's got to be directly in front of your mouth for it to actually work well.
You got to hold it right here.
It has to be like right there.
And you're trying not to block your face with the
And
mic.
it doesn't matter, you have to. You have no choice. For it to really work, it's got to be in front of your mouth.
100%.
Forget it, if it's on the podiums, unless you're short like me and you do.
It's on.
I know.
Not my first choice. Not my first choice. It's club business. When would you like to do it? Because you got now 1:15 is when we're reaching it. Well, we should do it because you're going to eat the cake during lunch. Is a good time to eat the cake, right?
Well, that's the only opportunity you're going to have to like take a snack.
Yeah, but I need, yes, that's a piece of it. And it's got my name on it.
I see that if Joey and Emily or whoever's the closest to me, if you want to call, which is the middle of lunch over there, sit around the table to get everybody's attention for about 30 seconds. You know, basically, Joey and Emily can certainly get everybody's attention. We reconvene at 1:15 is all we can be.
Are you sure it's Paul and not Mike?
No, I'm sure. I got the schedule right. No, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm sorry. Mike is next. And we have to reconvene before that. We got to reconvene before that. No, what time is it?
They've got to run this stuff by 8. So the next two speakers.
That's the time I got left for what?
I'll go find Mike. I'll go find
Oh, we're supposed to reconvene at 12:30, so as soon as we can, we don't have much time for lunch. It probably won't be 12:30, but it's supposed to start at 12:30. As soon as I see people are I'm trying to get their attention. They don't pay attention. Actually, look for the right place to interrupt them, and it's not. Yeah, he's supposed to start at 12:30 to be done. Thanks, Louise. That's what people do. Good. I'm just behind schedule as per usual. Unless you can stretch time, or you feel more comfortable with interrupting people. I'm sure we can. The person going to the back, he knows how the lights work. Oh no! I don't mean that. The problem is, speakers do that. And even though you sort of keep hinting and leaning closer and leaning closer, they keep going and then they turn their back. It's like radio. Got to tap.
You know what we do in TV interviews?
Throw rocks.
So Liz, do that. Wrap it up.
Sorry, so you're saying,
Or you can definitely do it at the Academy Awards when the speaker is going on too long and just start playing. They're going down. Exit music. That's the cue. That's right. I'm serious.
I have no control over that.
Coffee at first.
Receptive.